1st of October 2049, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Chinese cosmonauts take off for the first ever manned spaceflight to Mars. China has quickly overtaken the great Russian, European, and American space agencies, which it has been closely monitoring for years.
The Chinese government has identified very specific technology, capabilities, intelligence that it needs to collect in order to help it be much more competitive in the global economy.
2049, China is the leading economic and technological power in the solar system. This power has been acquired with no scruples whatsoever.
As soon as you need something and you're prepared to pay for it, there's an automatic process of wanting to get there faster, and you want to acquire technology faster. Things move too fast, and when you move too fast, you get into the realms of espionage.
The Chinese flag will soon fly over the red planet. Fiction, of course, but not as unrealistic as all that. Already, China has absolutely no qualms about gathering all the information it needs from every corner of the globe.
Our information services estimate that within the context of economic espionage, whether it be at state or lander level, China has been public enemy number one for decades.
An enemy with virtually unlimited material and human resources. China is now rich, the world's second biggest economic power. And 1.3 billion Chinese patriots, voluntary and coerced, can be mobilized to gather and analyze all the information it could possibly need, regardless of how it is acquired.
A former Chinese prime minister once said to me, "Are you aware that we are as well informed as you are? And we work harder. So you can stick to doing things your way, but we will catch up with you if you don't work with us."
Today, China has the biggest spy network in the world. It's a huge dragon with thousands of heads, of which only a few have been discovered.
Voilà en quoi consiste ce prix. Donc, il y a
So what this prize consists of is this certificate given by the Chinese government to foreign experts who have collaborated with China. In my case, it was for research into solid mechanics. And we also met the Chinese Prime Minister. And I'm here, right here. After that, we were invited to dinner with the President of China. We weren't at the same table as him, but we were nearby, so I think that's a privilege too.
Contrary to appearances, Ziad Moumni doesn't work in China, but in the Paris suburb of Palaiseau. He runs the mechanics department at ENSTA, the National School for Advanced Mechanics. It's an engineering college with a big reputation in France and now in China too.
Can you repeat the sequence?
The presence here of Chinese PhD students no longer surprises anyone. In this laboratory, Ziad Moumni and the students study the properties of so-called intelligent structures, like shape memory materials.
The difficulty lies in finding equations to modelize this rather peculiar behavior. So, for a start, you have to run tests. to understand and discover that behavior, and then using the test results to describe them with mathematical models, which we call behavior laws.
Professor Mumni's work has caught the eye of Xi'an Polytechnic in China. The organization, which is dependent on the Chinese Ministry of Defense, has high expectations of him, notably in the field of transport, from electric cars and the space industry through civil and military aeronautics. Therefore, he regularly goes to Xi'an, where he trains budding engineers. In return, students have been encouraged to enroll in his Parisian campus. This exemplary cooperation has allowed Ziad Mumni to be awarded the very prestigious Friendship Award, along with 50 other top-level international scientists. This is not only flattering, but also beneficial to his school's reputation and its budget. He is happy, the Chinese are happy, but behind the scenes there are dissenting voices.
The problem is that the people who come here are not just here to admire what we do. They are here to learn and then, if they can, do it better at home. And that can be a sharp wake-up call for us when it happens.
In China, innovation is the regime's #1 priority. But in recent years, its toolbox was rather rudimentary. So the Chinese government deployed a huge recruitment drive of foreign experts in order to increase their knowledge and train the next generation of Chinese engineers. The most ambitious program in this field is called 1,000 Talents and aims to bring almost 2,000 researchers to China over the next 10 years. Ziad Mumni is one of the chosen few. In France, researchers holding both a Friendship Prize and 1,000 Talents bursary are rare.
So for us, collaboration is already underway.
The Chinese know they can cherry-pick their chosen professors by appealing to their ideals.
Actually, we've taken a rather scientific approach, a scientific collaboration to push science forward together. And we've achieved a real synergy because we bring something to the table, and so do the Chinese.
Today, Ziad Mumni is in Shanghai to present the results of his research to the Chinese engineering school, which is partnered with ENSTA. Their exchanges were fruitful, and the French researcher is happy, proud, and totally at ease in an environment of academic partnership to which he is much attached. But behind the scenes, others do not feel the same way.
What can I say when two engineers get together? But forget about nationality, they talk shop. So one of them will blithely go on talking about the work he's been doing, his research, etc., and the guy he's talking to, whose loyalty is to his country, because the Chinese are patriotic. I'm not saying nationalistic, I'm saying patriotic. Patriots work for their country. When interesting things reach a Chinaman's ears, they're not deaf ears.
As the Chinese students at the ENSTA in Paris will very kindly confirm.
We are working for science, and for our country too. Our research has a personal target, of course, but it also makes a contribution to the development of our country and its military defenses. We have to start defending our innovations in every sphere. And to do that, we have to make laboratories more secure. But it's not a case of turning them into Fort Knox or North Korea. It's not a case of barricading them with checkpoints, barriers, and barbed wire. It's a matter of seeing what really needs to be protected. As for the rest, no problem.
From the point of view of national defenses, Ziad Mumni is not bound by any Secrecy Act. But other researchers are not allowed to become part of the 1,000 Talents. Western services are quite aware that this is the fish tank from which their Chinese counterparts catch their most valuable collaborators. The dragon, therefore, needs to find other ways to feed itself.
As everyone knows, a lamprey is a kind of eel found in Gironde during certain seasons. It latches onto its prey and absorbs everything it needs from it and throws away anything it can't use.
This lamprey's first target at the end of the 1990s were the high-speed trains. China wanted to develop its own network, and it opened its markets to foreign companies. They tempted them with juicy contracts that they had no intention of signing, and took the opportunity to closely study Japanese, German and French know-how.
What can you do? I'm not going to say that was wrong what you did, it wasn't on, you tricked us. No, I'd say we were naive. We were naive because we should have known. And instead of thinking we were so good that our train would blow everyone away, we should have smelled a rat.
In fact, the Chinese had set a very clever machination, which they christened Reinovation. Since 2006, written in black and white in the government's plans, their ill-gotten gains have been, in a sense, laundered in the form of Chinese patents for Chinese usage. This is a method which legitimizes theft and closes the country's doors to all of those who do not go along with it. In the case of the high-speed trains, it worked like a charm. So the lamprey had swallowed things on wheels, but it was also partial to things that flew. It knew how to coax the great birds and convince them to nest on its territory. That is what happened to the European Airbus group. In exchange for its expertise, China promised the group good fortune and prosperity in the Chinese markets and gave it an advantage in its race against US-based Boeing. It brought several hundred Airbus aircraft, but on one condition. The A320s had to be assembled here in China at Tianjin. Louis Gallois, Airbus's director at the time, knew perfectly well what the significance of this was.
Obviously, they were telling us, in the current market, it's the technology we want. And you can continue selling planes in China while maintaining the same level of technology transfers. They were no longer content with expertise.
On Tianjin's assembly lines, the Chinese now had access, legally, to technology that they had not yet mastered. They were not about to stop there. Their curiosity went further still. In early 2007, an Airbus A320, bought by a local Chinese company, was reported missing. The plane, which was heading for a maintenance appointment, never arrived. It disappeared from all radars. It eventually reappeared intact on the tarmac of a Chinese airport. Certain industrial espionage experts suggested that it was more than likely that the aeroplane had been taken secretly to a hangar, entirely taken apart, examined, and then reassembled. Little by little, Beijing was building its skill base and was getting ready to launch its own medium-haul aircraft. By June 2015, the aeronautical world was aware that the Chinese C919 was very advanced and closely resembled its European cousin, the Airbus A320. The Chinese constructor, Comac, initially presented just a model of its future narrow-body aircraft, an airliner made in China, sponsored by President Xi Jinping himself, which would end up chasing the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320 from China's skies. Do you have any concerns about the C919 and the competition it may present, or are you going to wait and see what happens?
So I told them, I don't think it'll be a better aircraft than the A320.
Are you keen to see exactly what the 919 looks like?
No, not especially, no.
To make any uncomplimentary comment is unthinkable. The Chinese market is the biggest in the world, and at the moment, with its arrangements in place, Airbus processes 50% of China's aircraft orders. It's just unfortunate that the European consortium's new partners are a little too greedy for information.
The Chinese have the same word for copy and learn. A good pupil is one who imitates his teacher well. And so it's true that there is some resentment afterwards. But basically, in the beginning, to be able to produce the same product as Europeans and of the same quality is a huge achievement for a Chinese craftsman.
The curtain is finally rising. The aeroplane you see approaching is the most modern jet in the world. It's the wonderful fruit of research and development in the People's Republic of China.
The C919 had its first performance tests in Shanghai in late 2015. The ceremony was spectacular, with military parades, hymns, and the national flag all making the headlines of the TV news. It would be hard to produce anything more majestic when the C919 made its maiden flight. A few weeks later, in Tianjin in March 2016, Airbus announced the inauguration of a new assembly line, this time building long-haul aircraft. The A330s built in Tianjin would fly from late 2017 under the same kind of contract which allowed the building of the A320s. Meanwhile, Comac was putting the finishing touches to its own long-haul aircraft, which would turn out to look very similar to the A330. Its C929 is due to be operational in 2023, but for Airbus, the worst was yet to come. The Lamprey, which was starting to look more like a dragon, had an insatiable appetite. But back in Paris, the French authorities didn't want to hear it, despite the fact that they were fully aware of China's strategic ambitions. The Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology had openly published them in a 15-year plan in 2006. The plan was dissected by experts from the French D2IE, an interministerial delegation for economic intelligence. A still confidential 25-page report was delivered to the Élysée Palace in 2010. It warned against Chinese illegal practices and pointed out a number of traps to look out for. Theft of samples during business trips, the charms of the swallow, experts in pillow talk, and the placement of fake trainees in French businesses. As in the case of Lily Wang in 2005, the police retrieved from her computer confidential information stolen from her employer, Valeo. A 2-year prison sentence was followed by a quiet return to China for this fine little information foot soldier. Larceny, sex, lies and big money, classic recipes, but the scale of their implementation is less so, and the obliviousness of some of the directors dazzled by the immensity of the Chinese market is particularly surprising.
France is fully mobilized to achieve its objective of luring 50,000 Chinese students to the country in 2015.
Come and invest in France. Come and settle in France.
Ever proud of having been the first country to recognize the People's Republic of China back in 1964, the French powers that be have been very accommodating ever since, probably a little too much so.
Without a doubt, the French have a natural naivety. The number of times I've heard big captains of industry telling me, "Oh, come on, no, really, you can't mean, not us, we're far too..." Well, yes, you, sir. You may have gone to a good university, you may have an amazing team, but you can be taken for a ride like anyone else. And that's what people need to understand. And you have this secondary layer of arrogance. We have a tendency to think that we're better than the rest. So, for one, we don't think they can rip us off. And anyway, if they do rip us off, we're so good that it won't matter. But history has shown that that isn't the case.
Across the Rhine, no one was laughing about the fast train or Airbus misadventures. There was less naivety and arrogance here, and there were frank and forceful discussions between Chancellor Merkel and the Chinese authorities. But this was still not enough to stop Germany from being targeted by the Chinese secret services. During the early 2000s, Chinese spying was at such a high level in Germany that Der Spiegel magazine ran a headline reading "The Yellow Spies." Corrupt trainees, bugging at the highest level of state, spyware. Any information was worth having. The information services gave this all-out collection the name the grain of sand technique.
If you look at all the grains of sand on the beach as the bits of information that need to be gathered, well, the West's secret services and the Russians would send someone with a heater and a spade to fill up their bucket as quickly as possible and disappear before the sun comes up. The Chinese approach is completely different. The Chinese use a process you might call mass collection. So they might send 1,000 bathers that day with their towels and swimming costumes. They enjoy themselves all day, and that evening, when they go back to their hotel, they all go to the same place to shake their towels so the grains of sand fall out. And that's a very big difference between the West's services and Chinese services, in that they use pretty much everything at their disposal.
Berlin's counter-espionage services were, like their French counterparts, fully aware of the situation. But they were much more open.
The Chinese government had very ambitious plans where the economy was concerned, but also with regard to arms. In the case of the economy, it meant that for their objectives to be achieved, every ounce of Chinese energy must be exploited, and also that certain information would be necessary. Only they would only be able to acquire this after many long, hard years of research. It was easier and cheaper to gather the fruits of these labors by stealing them through espionage, whether it was through human spying or cyber attacks.
Over time, Germany learned in its dealings with China to limit the damage caused by these hordes of sand thieves. But the German information services estimate the annual cost of this larceny to be over 50 billion euros, from cars to machine tools to the most basic chainsaw.
The problem is knowing how to continue with this cooperation, but do it in such a way that if China does become competitive, it behaves in a sporting manner. And that's another matter.
Une autre affaire.
Washington, too, was aware that the great danger in terms of espionage was no longer the Soviet Union and its moles, but ironically, the Americans' prime economic partner, China. According to the FBI, industrial espionage costs the USA billions of dollars and several million jobs every year. And when the Bureau investigated, 4 times out of 5 it would run into Chinese sleeping partners who were interested in everything.
Healthcare, energy, transportation, communications, financial services, retail, hospitality. It's across the board in every sector, and they're all being targeted.
Oh, I think it's very serious, and I think it's a matter of both national security and economic security. Because the Chinese are not just going after government agencies, they're going after private companies, they're going after individuals to try to get an upper hand in, and get a competitive advantage.
The war against economic espionage has become one of the American administration's main priorities. The stakes are so high that in 2015, the FBI launched an awareness-raising campaign, including streaming a bona fide blockbuster, The Company Man, on its website. And the least that can be said is that the Bureau's interpretation was less than subtle.
Robert Moore?
This short film stars Robert Moore as an engineer in a small Iowa business who invents a highly technological form of glass insulation. Overlooked, he struggles to make the grade and dreams of earning a better living. Then he gets a call from a Chinese company interested in the technology he has developed. Robert ends up meeting two Chinese recruiting agents who put their cards on the table.
Hello, Robert. Good to meet you. We are prepared to offer you $100,000 for the plans for the equipment and the formula for the glass insulation, and $100,000 for your assistance in setting up the manufacturing. Please, consider it.
In real life, Robert Moore's story is exactly that of Dejan Karabazevich, who was employed by an American company making high-tech components on the East Coast. A product of American innovation, founded and run by engineers from the legendary MIT, American Superconductor created software and electrical components for wind turbines. In 2004, American Superconductor employed Dejan Karabazevich as its Austrian representative. The US company was at that point in the middle of a world conquest, filing patents in every direction.
So this one's for a superconductor drive for motors, generators, could be used in a wind turbine even.
In 2006, Daniel McGann was approached by the Chinese group Sinovel, a future giant in the wind power industry, and one of whose financial partners was none other than the son of the then Prime Minister Wen Jiaba. Beijing had recently imposed a new law concerning renewable energy, which was favorable to the development of wind farms. The prospects were worthy of the vast Chinese market.
Facing up to challenges, we brave difficulties. In China,
Sinovel made the wind turbine's metallic structure, while American Superconductor provided the technology. American brains and Chinese money were a match made in heaven. But the dragon's eyes were bigger than its belly, and it wanted to hijack the technology for its own ends. Meanwhile, the American business thought its software was well protected, but in 2010, something happened on one of the testing sites which revealed the snake beneath the rose.
Our service team discovered a version of our software running on these turbines that had not been released yet.
There was no possible doubt. The software, which was thought to be invulnerable, had been pirated. Conscious of the risk, McGann had put in place a complex system of data locks whose key was held in Austria. An internal analysis of several hundred communications confirmed that Sinovel had benefited from the complicity of the Austria-based Serb engineer. Investigators found that he had sold the source codes for the software for $1.7 million.
So I don't know if it's wine, women, and song, but they did provide a way of life in China for him, an apartment, money, women. There were contracts that in total were about 11 million RMB. So it wasn't that they were trying to get his help or his expertise. They were trying to get something much deeper than that, which is our intellectual property.
An Austrian judge found Karabazevich guilty of industrial espionage on behalf of Sinovel. He got 1 year in prison and a €200,000 fine, which was very lenient. But the damage to American Superconductor was considerable. The group recorded losses of $1 billion and had to lay off 600 people, 2/3 of its workforce. And the story did not end there. Since its dispute with Sinovel, the American company had noticed frequent intrusion in its system. The company then decided to call on CrowdStrike, a company run by a former FBI data security expert, to analyze the source of these cyber attacks. They knew from previous experience where to start looking.
They use their most capable cyber experts to try and remotely access the networks, to steal all that data, which they then provide to Chinese companies who are able to compete with the Western companies on the global stage.
A fake internal email, outwardly mundane, turned up on every one of American superconductors' computers. As soon as anyone opened the very interesting report about its former partner Sinovel, an invisible virus spread to all of the company's computers and opened up access to all of their data. CrowdStrike followed the trail, and its analysts soon found themselves face to face with an infernal machine, the Chinese industrial espionage apparatus.
When we drill down into those attacks, we can see that actually an adversary has been responsible for this attack. And it's an adversary called Common Panda. This is our name that we give them, which actually maps to Unit 61398 in China, one of the units within the People's Liberation Army that is responsible for conducting a lot of these espionage attacks.
So the Chinese army was behind these attacks on American superconductor. Cross-checking the IP addresses and many other clues allowed the experts to identify a Chinese military information unit which specialized in cyber hacking and trace it to this discreet apartment block in Shanghai's Pudong district, where several hundred hackers were working at the time. Given the task of targeting just the US and Canada, Unit 61398 employed several thousand people, good little web soldiers who had Achilles' heels of their own.
That's exactly what we see with these attacks, where the attackers make mistakes. Something they leave in the code, something they leave behind, something they forget to erase.
Oftentimes we see the activity literally map into 9 to 5 Beijing time zone. So you know that these are professionals that go to work, do their job, take a break during lunch, and go home at the end of the day and sleep well at night. It's a typical government bureaucrat.
So it seemed that this theft of intellectual property from hundreds of American companies benefiting Chinese businesses was directly orchestrated by the Chinese government. Such an allegation was diplomatically complicated and would have to be verified, documented, and backed up. It would also take considerable courage to make it public. The American Justice Department did just that in May 2014. Painstaking inquiries led to the identification of 5 Unit 61398 officers. The names and faces of the 5 Chinese spies were broadcast to the entire world.
Today we are announcing an indictment against 5 officers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army for serious cybersecurity breaches against 6 American victim companies. We must say enough is enough.
Hacking, spying, and cyber theft for commercial advantage can and will be prosecuted criminally, even when the defendants are state actors.
The Pennsylvania prosecutor made Beijing furious. China denied everything and refused to hand over the 5 spies because obviously they were not spies.
China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, and by doing so, they entered civilized worldwide commerce, and that was cheered by everybody because it opened up a whole new market. But the World Trade Organization has rules, and those rules of engagement include protection of intellectual property. These rules of engagement have been agreed to by all, including China.
It appeared that the Americans, no angels themselves in matters of espionage, had met their match. And they didn't like it. In September 2015, when the new Chinese president went to Washington for the first time, his host did not hesitate to make him lose face in public.
We believe that nations are more successful and the world makes more progress when our companies compete on a level playing field.
China strongly opposes and combats the thefts of commercial secrets and other kinds of hacking attacks.
If Xi Jinping agreed politely, a diplomatic incident would be avoided. But his 5 spies were sitting pretty in China, and the injured parties could do nothing more than cry into their beer. Like American Superconductor, who every day watched as Sinovel, the company that had stolen its software, was developing and even exporting its turbines overseas, even to the US, right on Daniel McGann's doorstep. One of them was erected on the shores of the Charles River in Boston, a recent acquisition of the Massachusetts State Water Company. The Dragon was laughing and considering its next course of action. China needed the secrets of the universe, of course. But what is less commonly known is that it had also become a world champion in magical propaganda. Let's take a little journey back in time. When he acceded to power in 2003, the president of China, Hu Jintao, placed a major Confucianist principle at the heart of the Communist Party's political strategy: harmony. Long forbidden, Confucian philosophy thus made its way back into the affections of the Chinese ruling elite. A little surprising, but very convenient for Beijing. The harmonious and peaceful image of the mustachioed philosopher is a boon for the party's Secretary-General, who was keen to draw a veil over incidents like Tiananmen Square, while preparations for the Beijing Olympics were in full swing. The benevolent figure of Confucius was chosen as the personification of Chinese cultural influence via the institutes named after him. There are now over 500 of these in the world, all controlled and coordinated from this Beijing building.
In the eyes of the West's information services, there is hardly a single Chinese company which wasn't infiltrated and controlled by the Chinese secret services. They were able to inveigle themselves into every sphere of society, be it industrial, academic, sometimes religious, but mainly political. Their influence could be found at every level.
If there was one country that managed to read China's intentions, it was Canada. This was probably because many Canadians are of Chinese origin and know the Dragon only too well. For these citizens who had opted to leave China, the thought of Beijing poking its nose into their everyday affairs again was unthinkable. They soon made their feelings known, and the media got worried.
On this episode of China Uncensored, is Chinese propaganda invading our schools?
Canada's McMaster University is closing down a controversial Chinese language class.
I'm, of course, talking about the now infamous Confucius Institutes.
The institute is partly funded by the Chinese government.
The Confucius Institutes were soon denounced as Trojan horses of Chinese interference. The debate became public, as it did in Toronto in October 2014. The country's most important academic council had got hold of the dossier.
My name is Michel Junot-Katsuya. I'm the former chief of Asia Pacific for CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. The Western agencies, counterintelligence agencies, has identified Confucius Institute as a form of spy agencies used by the government and employed by the government. Nobody is opposed about exchanging culture. Nobody is opposed about teaching or learning other languages. What we are opposed to is the foreign interference that comes into our country, spot our citizen, and eventually use them with or without their consent for ulterior motive that is maybe against the interests of this nation and the values of this nation.
In 2007, a confidential communication from the Canadian Secret Services alerted the government. They underlined the fact that China wants the world to be besotted with China and all things Chinese, and that China's subtle power takes on a great strategic value, notably in the detection of talents useful to the expansion of businesses and governments. The note confirmed that Beijing was looking for faithful but manipulable Sinophiles, what used to be known in the Cold War as useful idiots. China was in urgent need of such idiots to help infiltrate a major member of the G8, G20 and NATO. Canada was a prime target, and there too the Dragon was very active.
China's peculiarity is the sheer volume, the number of people it's capable of deploying, the number of people who want to go abroad and help China, because perhaps that's the only way of leaving the country. They are all used in the gathering of information, which may seem to many Westerners quite anodyne. But this is because they're going to take their information to another level. The next stage might be to send someone to get close to those people who are sympathetic to China, with the aim of coaxing them and convincing them to become agents of influence. So these agents of influence are very, very important.
Closely scrutinized and under pressure from public opinion, some Confucius Institutes were forced to close. Henceforth, this conduit for information and influence on Canada would be less useful for the Dragon, but it had a wealth of other resources. Staying informed is good. Controlling everything is better. Beijing will not tolerate any dissenting voices, wherever they may come from. When Tibetan exiles demonstrated in Paris, the Chinese secret services were less than pleased. It very soon seemed that they were everywhere. Tibetan opposition was one of the Chinese Communist Party's 5 deadly poisons. Another 2 were the democracy activists from Hong Kong and Taiwan, who refused to reintegrate to the mother country. The last 2 who terrified the Chinese communists were the Falun Gong traditionalists and the Muslim independence movement in Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, who, like the Tibetans, were very active abroad.
Well, I think that the Chinese worry very much about the potential for instability. And one of the major sources of instability is from minorities. If the Chinese only have to deal with potential threats inside China that emanate exclusively from inside, they are very manageable. Once they become wrapped up with people on the outside, then they become more of a threat.
At the foot of the Bavarian Alps, the Dragon had been keeping watch for many years. This is home to the biggest community of Chinese Muslim immigrants. Religious, pro-independence, sometimes supporters of armed struggle, but always very militant, these Uyghurs who fled Xinjiang are a bane of the Chinese authorities' lives.
Many Chinese see me as someone very dangerous, a separatist, which in Chinese terms is a terrorist.
Umid Hamid is no ordinary German citizen. From his Munich base, he was fighting China's central power structure, which in his view was destroying his country. "20 years ago, he lived here in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang, China's westernmost province. The town still had a Uyghur majority then. Not now. China effectively invited the Chinese ethnic Han majority to colonize the region, to drown any hotbeds of independence through sheer weight of numbers, to avoid losing the oil reserves or the immense expanse of desert which protected them from Western barbarians like the Russians or the Indians. A policy of Sinization was put in place, brutally enforced by the police and the army. This occupation was intolerable to the Uyghurs, who sometimes responded with violence. July 2009, a disagreement between Hans and Uyghurs descended into chaos. Several days of demonstrations and counter-demonstrations left nearly 200 dead, thousands injured, and a huge number of disappearances. Groups of Uyghurs became radicalized and coordinated attacks on China itself.
This is Xinjiang. This is our land. It belongs to us, not the Chinese.
For Beijing, such talk was intolerable. It is easy to see, therefore, why the Uyghur Global Congress in Munich was a nightmare for the Chinese. Omid Hamid was fully aware that the dragon's eye was upon him, especially when he demonstrated beneath the very windows of the Chinese consulate.
The Chinese diplomats film us all the time. They film the demonstration from beginning to end, and then they show it in China to put pressure on those who still have family over there and make them talk. They say members of your family, your daughters, your son have taken part in a demonstration. You need to do something to put a stop to it, or things might get unpleasant for you. They always do it.
Threats and blackmail are the Chinese Secret Service's favorite weapons. Over the last few years, following pressure applied to their family in China, a number of Uyghurs went home and passed on information to the Chinese authorities. 2 of them were arrested in Munich and tried for spying against their own community.
The Chinese Secret Services didn't necessarily consider every member of the Uyghur diaspora as a threat, but they were afraid that terrorist elements were hiding within the community. So, in order to catch one fish, they were prepared to empty the entire lake.
Emptying a lake would not be enough for China to get rid of the worst of the 5 poisons that threaten it. It was Falun Gong, a traditional spiritualist movement that had already made the powers that be shake with fear. 10 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre, President Jiang Zemin was not prepared to tolerate Falun Gong's refusal to pledge allegiance to the party. He ordered a number of arrests. This failed to impress the movement's adepts. In 1999, tens of thousands of them staged a peaceful surrounding of Zhongnonghai, the center of power. That day, the party witnessed how powerful the movement was and realized that its members outnumbered the party's own. This was very dangerous. A ferocious policy of elimination was implemented and has lasted ever since. Responsibility was given to Bureau 610, an office with direct links to the party's political bureau, which was active everywhere, not just in China.
Their remit was fairly simple: to find, hunt down, and neutralize, by any means necessary, any members of Falun Gong, especially those who lived outside the country, as they had the ability of being a strong voice against the Chinese government.
But Beijing's mortal enemy did not seem particularly threatening. Here, in this park in the Toronto suburbs, they practiced a type of meditative gymnastics as old as China itself. But for the Chinese Communist Party, since the events of 1999, this was a dangerous and contentious ideology which would have to be eradicated at all costs. In Toronto, the Chinese vice consul launched an attack on the movement's spokesperson, Joel Chikpa, even though he was a Canadian citizen, defaming him in the press and describing him as a member of a sinister cult. The estate agent sued and won the case. The consulate had already regained the upper hand in the Middle Empire in an attempt to avoid losing face.
We know the nature of the Chinese Communist Party. Ever since they took power in 1949, they have destroyed Chinese culture. They have destroyed the spirit of Chinese people. They want the Chinese people to think of the Communist Party as God, as the highest power on earth. And anything that tries to empower people, they eliminate. They're so afraid of losing power.
In the 80 countries where Falun Gong was officially established, every good Chinese patriot was asked to watch and report the so-called sect activities. Bureau 610 had a fine army of informers to rely on. But in 2005, Beijing lost a valuable collaborator. At the time, Chen Yonglin was posted in Sydney, Australia. Beneath his diplomatic cloak, he was actually part of Bureau 610, with particular responsibility for Falun Gong's disciples. Through infiltration and stalking, he collected the names, addresses, telephone numbers, and relationships of anyone involved to any degree with the dissident movement, whether they were Chinese or Australian. His documents nourished the powerful anti-Falun Gong machine for 4 years. And his stories made the blood run cold.
Nicknaming Bureau 610 Gestapo is in fact not an exaggeration, because it used all manner of methods to suppress Falun Gong. Among their methods were physical eliminations and psychological disintegration. Used against such a large section of the population, it really is a policy of destruction. So referring to them as Gestapo is not an exaggeration.
When he decided to defect, Chen Yonglin was prepared for anything except for Australia's refusal to grant him political asylum. Bad timing. Canberra and Beijing were then negotiating a raft of gas contracts. Chen Yonglin's soul-searching seemed to matter little.
Democracy should be established to build...
So he called upon Australian public opinion.
I'm actually in a very dangerous situation. Other security agents and may be kidnapped by them.
Even though he knew he was being closely watched, his visibility and numerous public statements guaranteed his safety. Everywhere he went, the former spy described the Chinese espionage apparatus, the party's geopolitical ambitions, and its fear that one day the people would stop believing in the dream.
This so-called dream of being a powerful country is a complete fake. A paper tiger, If a civilization is built against humanity, if it's a society with no human rights, how can it ever become a world power?
Chen Yonglin was probably wrong. China is taking giant steps in its race towards power. It's no longer afraid of anything. It wants to become the world's leading economy. It should succeed in this as planned in 2020. Between now and then and beyond, the dragon will surely not rest.
Donc il y a des directives renseignement.
So there are directives regarding information, and let me tell you, there's a number of Chinese secret agents who have veritable shopping lists to tell them what to pick up in Europe, be it on a civil or military level. Once again, it's not a matter of ostracizing the Chinese, but still protecting our own data, our technology, because these are our industries, this is our economy, and when it comes down to it, we're talking about keeping our jobs in our country.
We don't want to wake up to a Chinese reality. We don't want to wake up next to this slightly delinquent player who doesn't want to play by the rules in the playground and is always going to impose its own way of doing things, because we are dependent on China on many levels.
This is the dragon's key to impunity and an endless boon to its masters. A few centuries ago, the West, in its bid to rule the world, shamelessly stole the secrets of gunpowder and the compass from the Middle Empire. Now the wind has turned and is blowing gently in China's favor.
Comment c'est la Chine?
C'est plein de Chinois.
Je les imagine aussi rusés qu'ils sont courtois.
C'est pas ça, Ginette, c'est un peuple fier. Et c'est pas des gens qui ont du mou de veau dans la théière. J'ai fait le pari loufoque que je reviendrai là-bas. Chanter le zizi en shintok, ils en seront baba.